Hi, yeah. Thanks for taking my call. I've never told this to anyone, but I can't keep it inside anymore. It happened a few years back, at a fishing spot out past the edge of town, up near the hills. If it's okay, I'll just tell it the way I remember it. The air was strange that day, right before the rain. Heavy, damp. Every breath I took felt like wet earth clinging to the back of my throat. Out the car window the hills looked blurry and shaky, like an old film reel. My dad was unusually quiet that day, and I hated that silence because we were normally a loud family, especially my dad. The second he went fishing, he became a different person. He'd talk the whole time he was driving, going on about which spot was good, swearing the crappie would be biting today, just rambling about nothing. But that day was different. The only sound was the wipers dragging slowly across the glass. That repeating squeak stuck in my ears in a way I couldn't shake. "Dad, is this really the place?" When I asked, he didn't answer until a long moment later. Just a low, short, "Yeah." I leaned forward from the passenger seat and looked ahead. At the end of a narrow cement road, there was a small reservoir. It was a spot people on an online forum had called quiet, a hidden gem with nobody around. The outskirts of town, a little fishing hole that doesn't even show up right on the map. Originally my dad's buddy and his family were supposed to come too, but the morning we left, something came up and they bailed. So in the end it was just the three of us. My dad, my mom, and me, 29 at the time. Back then I had no idea that after that night, I'd never be able to listen to running water the same way again. The second I got out of the car, it felt like the temperature dropped. It was early fall, but the air around that reservoir was damp and cold, like winter breath. And the strange thing was, there was no wind, but the reeds by the water kept swaying. A dry rustling like someone was walking through them. My mom hunched her shoulders. "This place is kind of creepy." My dad didn't answer. He just opened the trunk and pulled out the rods and the tent. While I was carrying gear, I looked toward the water. The reservoir was bigger than I'd expected. The problem was it was too quiet. No birds. No insects. You know how a place like that should be loud enough to hurt your ears, with all the crickets and bugs? But here the sound was just gone. Hollow. Like someone had pressed every sound flat on purpose. The silence actually put pressure on my ears. We set up the tent on flat ground a little ways from the water. My dad kept glancing toward the reservoir. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pulled out a cigarette, shook his head. "It's nothing." But the look on his face was off. It was the face of a scared man. And in that moment, an old memory came back to me. I was in high school. My dad had been drinking, and for the first time he said something strange. Water doesn't forget a person's memory. When he said it back then, he had this exact same look. I'd written it off as drunk talk. But the way he stared at that reservoir, his eyes were exactly the same as that night. We ate a quick dinner before the sun went down. The smell of kimchi stew bubbling on the burner mixed with the damp air, and from the water came the occasional splash. A small sound. At first I figured it was a fish. But the weird thing was the sound was steady. A splash. A pause. Another splash. Like someone was throwing in one stone at a time. My mom must have heard it too, because she stopped eating. "Is somebody else out here?" My dad suddenly snapped, his voice irritated. "Don't pay attention to it." It was so sharp that my mom went quiet right away. I didn't want to stir things up, so I didn't ask anything either. But the more time passed, the stranger I felt, because it got too dark. Usually near a city you can see lights off in the distance, but here we were completely surrounded by hills, and there wasn't a single light. When you turned off the flashlight, it felt like the world itself had vanished. And in that perfect darkness, the reservoir sat there breathing like a black pit. I got up to go relieve myself. "Where are you going?" my mom asked. "Just a sec." I took the flashlight and walked toward the woods on the far side of the water. The ground was soaked, and the soles of my shoes kept sticking to the mud. That's when it happened. Behind me, I heard someone call my name. "Tejo." I stopped walking. Sounded like my mom's voice. But when I turned around, there was nobody there. Just the faint glow of the tent. The back of my neck went cold, because it had sounded close. Right next to my ear. Tejo. This time it was clearer. A low, wet voice. I snapped the flashlight up. The beam swept across the reeds. Nothing. But somewhere in the middle of them, the reeds were swaying just a little. With no wind. A rustle. A rustle. Like something inside was moving slowly. I froze on the spot. My brain was screaming to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard it rang in my ears. Then I saw something white between the reeds. Almost like a face. Just for the instant the light brushed over it. Then gone. I backed away, swallowing a scream, and that's when I felt something soft and wet under my foot. I pointed the flashlight down. There was a footprint in the mud. Bare feet. And the strange part was the direction. It wasn't coming from the water. It was heading into the woods. Like someone had walked out of the reservoir. I ran straight back to the tent, out of breath. My mom looked at me, startled. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer right away. My dad looked at my face, then dropped his cigarette on the ground. And in a very low voice, he asked, "Did you see it?" Those words made my blood run cold. He had the face of a man who already knew what I'd seen. I couldn't say a word. That night, for the first time, our family zipped the tent shut all the way to sleep. And around 1 in the morning, someone started slowly circling the outside of the tent. Slap, slap, wet, bare feet. At first I thought I was dreaming. The sound was so regular. Slap, slap. The dull sound of wet soles pressing into mud, circling the tent very slowly. I lay there with my eyes open, holding my breath. Through the tent fabric, a faint lantern light was wavering. My mom was awake too, clutching the blanket, trembling. And my dad was just sitting there, hunched over, like a man who'd been waiting for that sound. The wet steps stopped right behind the tent. And in that moment, the fabric pressed in just barely. A little tap, like a single finger touching it. My mom drew a sharp breath. "Honey," my dad whispered, like he was covering her mouth. "Be quiet." His tone was so low and firm that even I held my breath. Outside there was no sound at all. But the feeling that someone was still standing there wouldn't go away. You know how you can feel eyes on you even without seeing anyone? It was exactly that. With one layer of fabric between us, someone was watching us. I don't know how much time passed. Then the sound started moving again. Splash, splash, this time near the tent entrance. And very faintly, I heard someone breathing, a breath leaking out of a wet throat. My mom finally broke down and spoke. "If you're a person, say something." The sound stopped. Silence. My heart dropped. Those few seconds felt horribly long. And then, the very next moment, the zipper handle on the tent started moving slowly. A little zip. Just a tiny bit. Someone outside was opening the zipper. I grabbed my mom before she could scream. My dad jumped up, snatched the flashlight, and suddenly threw the tent flap wide open. "Who's there?" The strong beam cut through the dark. But there was nobody outside. Just wet ground and swaying reeds. But then my dad's flashlight stopped on the ground. I followed where it pointed. In the mud all around the tent, there was a full ring of bare footprints. Not one or two, dozens. Like someone had circled us over and over. My mom clapped a hand over her mouth. "What is that?" The footprints were strange. There were almost no heel marks. They were pressed deep, like someone walking only on their toes. And stranger still was the size. They were small, like a child's feet. My throat suddenly went dry. It was so quiet I could hear myself swallow. Then from the reservoir came another splash. We all turned at once. Small ripples were spreading across the black water. And behind them, someone was standing at the water's edge. A faint shape, what looked like white clothing. My mom said in a shaking voice, "Isn't that a person?" But my dad said nothing. His face was rigid. And in that moment I understood. This wasn't the first time my dad had seen this. The thought sent a chill down my spine. He slowly lowered the flashlight and said quietly, "Don't look." But it was already too late. The shape at the water's edge had started moving. Slowly toward us. A splash. The sound of a foot lifting out of the water carried all the way to us. The shape was walking out of the reservoir. My mom burst into tears. "Honey, what is that?" My dad suddenly shouted, "Get in the tent!" And almost reflexively my mom and I scrambled inside. My dad hurried in after and zipped it shut, his breathing ragged. Outside, the wet footsteps came closer again. Slowly, like it was trying to scare us on purpose. I clapped my hand over my mouth. The steps stopped right in front of the tent. And then, a tap. The feeling of something leaning against the fabric. The fabric pushed inward a little. My mom grabbed my dad, half out of her mind. "Call the police! Call the police!" But the phone was dead. It hadn't had signal for a while. I tried to force myself to stay calm. Maybe it's a person, I told myself. Maybe it's just some lunatic playing a prank. I tried to believe that. But then a voice came from outside the tent. "Open the door." A woman's voice, wet and hoarse. My mom went rigid because the voice sounded exactly like hers. "Open the door." Goosebumps shot across my whole body. My mom was right next to me, and yet I was hearing my mom's voice from outside too. My dad gritted his teeth. "Don't answer." The voice came again, this time almost laughing. "Memories." Splash. Something started moving around the tent again. And in that moment a childhood memory came back to me. When I was in elementary school, there was a night in the dead of winter when my dad came home drunk. He was wet that night too. His clothes smelled like rotten water, and my mom got angry, asking why he'd gone to the reservoir again. And what my dad said then, I shouldn't have brought him along. I never understood what that meant. But now it was different. In a shaking voice I asked, "Dad, have you been here before?" He said nothing for a long while. Outside, the wet steps kept circling. Splash, splash, and mixed in, very faintly, the sound of someone sobbing, like a small child crying. Finally my dad spoke. 20 years ago. His voice was cracked. "Somebody died here." The air felt like it froze. My mom looked stunned, hearing it for the first time too. My dad's hands shook as he reached for a cigarette, but the lighter wouldn't catch. Click, click. Back then it was me and 3 friends out here. It was pouring rain. We were drinking and messing around, and one of the kids fell in the water. I held my breath. His eyes were wavering. And we didn't report it. My mom stared at him in disbelief. We were scared. We'd been drinking, and we were afraid we'd get blamed. The second he finished saying it, there was a sudden thud from outside. Something struck the tent hard 3 times. My mom screamed, and right after, a woman's voice whispered, very close, "Why didn't you pull her out?" My heart nearly stopped. That voice, this time it was clearly a young girl's. Cold. My dad's face went white. From outside came the sound of running water. Drip, like water dripping off wet hair. And under the tent fabric, black water slowly began to seep in. At first I thought it was rainwater. But the smell was different. That water smelled like long-rotted earth. The smell that rises when you open a drain that's been clogged for years. Wet wood and rotting grass and something fishy mixed in. The black water spread across the floor of the tent like it was crawling. My mom hugged her knees, crying, "Honey, I'm so scared." My dad couldn't say anything. I'd never seen that man so afraid in my life. I'd seen him angry plenty of times, but I'd never seen him crumble like that. From outside, splash, splash, the wet footsteps again. But this time it was different. It wasn't one set of steps. There were 2. One was small and slow, bare feet. And the other was a dragging sound. A rustle, then a splash. Like something wet was being dragged along. I stared at the tent fabric and almost stopped breathing, because I could see shadows outside, faint in the lantern light. 2 human shapes. One standing. The other slumped on the ground, being dragged. My mom must have seen it too. She just covered her mouth and let the tears run. My dad suddenly cursed under his breath. And at the same moment, from outside, a young girl's laugh. A short, low laugh. Then a scratching sound started at the back of the tent. Slowly, like fingernails dragging. Scratch, scratch. I wanted to cover my ears. You know that sound a person just instinctively can't stand, like nails on a chalkboard? It got into my nerves in a way I can't describe. My mom finally broke down sobbing. Let's just leave. Please, let's get out of here. But my dad shook his head. We can't. Why not? My mom nearly shouted. And in that instant the scratching stopped. Silence. And then, right behind the tent, a tap. The feeling of something leaning its weight against it. The fabric pushed inward. My dad whispered, very low, "Don't make a sound." My mom pressed her hand over her mouth and swallowed her crying. I couldn't even breathe loudly. If the thing outside were a person, I'd almost have rather it just came in. But it wasn't a person. My body already knew that before my mind did. Then, through the tent fabric, I saw the outline of a face. Long hair, soaked with water. A head drooping down. And a neck that was abnormally long. I doubted my own eyes for a second. I thought maybe the lantern shadow was distorting it. But that shape was definitely pressing its face close to the fabric. And very slowly, it tilted its head to the side. A crack. Loud enough to sound like a neck bone breaking. My mom screamed on the spot. And at the same time, the shape outside vanished. A splash, the sound of something pulling back fast. And from the reservoir, a loud splash, like someone had jumped back into the water. A suffocating silence followed. None of us could say anything. In the middle of it, my dad got up from his spot. I grabbed him, startled. "Where are you going?" In a shaking voice he said, "I have to end this." "End what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he dug through the fishing bag in the corner of the tent and pulled out an old flashlight. The metal parts were rusted, an old worn-out flashlight. The second I saw it, I got a strange feeling, because it looked like something he'd kept ready for a long time. My mom grabbed his arm, crying, "Don't go out there. Please." For the first time, my dad looked at her. His eyes looked so exhausted. I did something wrong. Those words pressed on my chest in a strange way, because he was a man who never once admitted fault in his whole life. My dad went on slowly. "When that kid fell in that day, she wasn't dead yet. I felt the breath leave me. She begged us to save her. Outside, wind began to blow. Or rather, cold air was pushing in from the reservoir. The tent fabric flapped. My dad's voice got smaller and smaller. But we ran." My mom's face went white. I couldn't say anything. In my head, strange pieces started clicking together. Why my dad knew this place. Why he kept watching the water. Why he hadn't looked like he was seeing that thing for the first time. My dad hadn't come back to this place. He'd been dragged back. Then suddenly from outside, "Daddy!" A young girl's voice. My mom flinched. "Daddy!" My whole body froze, because that voice sounded like my own when I was little. Only then did I realize the thing outside was imitating our voices. "I'm cold." The sound of running water. Drip. And the shadow under the tent fabric moved slowly, like it was crawling. I gripped the flashlight. The shadow stopped in front of the tent entrance. And through the gap under the zipper, a single wet finger pushed in. A bloated, white finger. The nail was long and cracked black. My mom screamed like she'd lost her mind. My dad shot up and swung the flashlight down on that hand. A crack. And outside, a horrible scream erupted. A screech. It didn't sound like a human voice. It sounded like an animal scraping metal. And at the same time, the whole tent shook hard. A thud. Something was hitting the tent from outside. I held my mom. My dad gasped out, "Run now." And with that, he threw the zipper open. Cold air rushed in. We bolted outside, frantic. In the wavering lantern light, I could see the reservoir. And at the water's edge, someone was standing. Much closer this time. Wet hair covered the face, and the body was pale and swollen, like it had bloated in the water. And one arm was bent the wrong way, like it had broken at the moment of death. My mom collapsed, sobbing. "It's a person. A person." But that wasn't the way a person moves. The shape slowly, so slowly, raised its head. Through the hair I could see part of its face. There were no eyes. Where the eyelids should have been, there were just black holes. I froze solid. The thing opened its mouth. And in a voice full of water, it said, "Why did you come?" Suddenly the whole reservoir filled with the sound of water. Splash, splash, splash. Not one. the sound of things rising all over the water at once. On the rippling, lantern-lit surface, things like human heads were slowly floating up. The first thing to surface was hair. Wet hair spreading out over the black water, slowly, like water weeds swaying below the surface. And it began to take the shape of a human head. One, then another, bobbing up all over the reservoir. The moment my mom saw it, she gagged like she was going to be sick. "Honey, what is that?" My dad couldn't answer. His face had completely fallen apart. I moved the flashlight with a trembling hand. Every time the beam crossed the water, wet faces showed for a second. Eyes closed, mouths open, skin swollen and puffy like flesh that's been underwater a long time. And the strange thing was, they all had the same expression. They all looked wronged, like people who'd wanted to live until the very last moment. One of them moved, slowly, like it was raising its body up out of the water. I couldn't breathe because a person can't stand on top of water. But it was walking out, like it was stepping along the bottom of the reservoir. My dad suddenly grabbed my arm, hard. His voice was cracked. "Right now." We took off running, half out of our minds. Behind us the water sounds kept coming. Splash, splosh, splash. Several things were coming out of the water at the same time. I tried not to look back. But you know how when a person feels terror, they have to look at the thing they shouldn't? In the end I looked, and the second I saw it my legs nearly gave out. Black shapes were walking out of the water in a line. All of them wet, heads hanging low. Some of them had arms and legs bent the wrong way. One had its neck turned to the side. One was dragging a leg. It wasn't living movement, and yet so slowly, so naturally, they were following us. My mom wailed, "Go, hurry, go." We ran for the slope where the car was. I slipped on the mud over and over. My shoes were soaked through, and strangely, the air outside was freezing too, like walking under frozen water. My breath came up to my throat. Then from behind, "Tejo." I almost stopped on instinct. It was my sister's voice. My sister who was already dead. My sister who died in a car accident at 15. I froze solid. From behind again. "Tejo, look at me." My mom yanked my wrist like a mad woman. "Don't look." In that instant my head cleared. I gritted my teeth and ran again. But my heart was shaking violently, because that voice was too real. Just like the night before she died. That quiet laughing voice. Exactly the same. Behind us, more and more voices mixed together. "Honey, honey, Daddy, save me." They were all voices of people we knew. And only then did I understand. This wasn't simply a ghost. It was pulling out the deepest memories in our hearts. The weakest parts of us. We finally made it near the car. My dad rushed to open the door, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped the keys over and over. Click, click. "Hurry up." My mom was nearly screaming. And in that moment a splash. Right behind us. Too close. We all turned at once. The girl who'd been standing at the water's edge was standing just a few meters behind us. I had no idea when she'd followed. Through the wet hair I could see a pale face. Her mouth slowly opened, and water poured out of it. I was cold. The instant she said it, my dad suddenly dropped to his knees. I froze in shock. My dad muttered in a shaking voice, "I'm sorry." My mom yelled, "What are you doing? Get up." But my dad didn't move. Tears were falling. "That day I should have pulled you out." The girl looked down at him without a word, and slowly tilted her head. That strange sound came from her neck again. A crack. Couldn't breathe. Then from the reservoir behind us, a huge splash erupted. A boom. Loud enough to shake the ground. Like something enormous was thrashing in the water. At the same time the wind started blowing wildly. The reeds whipped in every direction. Rustle, rustle, rustle. My mom screamed, "Look over there." I reflexively looked at the reservoir. And I'll never forget that scene. Human faces were floating on the water. Dozens. Maybe even more. They were all looking at us. Faces with no eyes. Bloated, gaping mouths. And they were all smiling at the same time. The smile was so wrong. It wasn't happy and it wasn't angry. It just looked like the expression a person makes when they break completely. All those faces opened their mouths at once. "Aren't you leaving?" The voices overlapped. Men, women, children, old people. Dozens whispering at once. "Stay with us." My mom was on the verge of fainting. My dad was still kneeling, not moving. I finally grabbed him by the collar. "Do you want to die right now?" That's when it happened. The girl suddenly moved. Very fast. A splash. In an instant, she was right in front of my face. I screamed and fell backward. The wet smell came rushing right up to my face. The smell of rotten water. And the face revealed through the hair. It wasn't the girl's face. The skin was melting like it had liquefied, and the mouth was torn all the way to the ears. Above all, the eyes. There were no eyeballs, and yet she was clearly looking at me. "You saw it too." The voice echoed inside my ears. That day, I thought my breath had stopped. I didn't understand what she meant by that day. But in that very moment, a buried memory came back. A long time ago, when I was in elementary school, the day my dad came home drunk. Wet clothes, dirt-covered hands, and the strange sound of water outside the front door. Splash, splash. That night, I'd seen someone standing outside the window, a wet girl. I thought that memory was a dream all this time, but it wasn't. That thing had been following our family since that night. A feeling worse than fear washed over me, an inexplicable guilt, like I was someone who had already known. In that moment, the girl's face came right up to mine. A cold drop of water fell on my face. "Why did you pretend not to see?" I couldn't say anything. It was like my throat had closed. Only rough breaths leaked out. Her face was right in front of my eyes. The smell of rotten water pushed into my nose, and her soaked hair slid over the back of my hand. It was cold, not the temperature of living skin. "Why did you pretend not to see?" The voice rang inside my ears, like it wasn't speaking with a mouth, but scratching directly inside my head. I tried to crawl backward, but my body wouldn't move, like every muscle had locked up. Then my dad suddenly shouted, "Don't touch him." At the same time, he lunged at the girl. For an instant, her shape wavered, like a shadow reflected on water. And the next moment, a slam. My dad's body was thrown into the air, like he'd been shoved by some invisible force. He slammed against the ground by the car. My mom screamed, "Honey!" Only then did my body move. I scrambled backward, gasping for air. But the girl was only looking at me. Or rather, she had the look of someone gazing into somewhere deep inside me. Even with no eyes, that's the feeling I got. "You saw." The words kept repeating, and in that moment my head started ringing. Forgotten scenes rose up one by one, like surfacing from underwater. Childhood, a rainy night, the wet girl standing outside the window. And back then, I'd been so scared I pulled the blanket over my head and pretended not to see. I never told my dad either, because that night, my dad had been crying outside my bedroom door. It was the first time I'd ever seen that strong man hide and cry, and I saw it and still pretended not to. That memory had been buried deep in my head all this time. "I'm sorry." The words came out before I knew it, and the corner of the girl's mouth slowly rose, an expression that looked like crying as much as smiling. In that moment, from the reservoir, a tremendous sound of water exploded, loud enough to shake the ground. We turned at once, and we saw it. The faces floating on the water were all moving, slowly toward us. Splash, splash. Dozens of wet shapes were climbing the slope. My mom completely collapsed, sinking down and just sobbing. "No!" My dad got up with blood at the corner of his mouth, barely. And in a shaking voice he said, "Get in the car. Dad, hurry." I hauled my mom up. There was no strength in her body at all. I practically dragged her into the passenger seat. The whole time, my dad kept looking at the girl. He wasn't running. That was the strangest part. He looked like a man whose awaited moment had finally come. I threw open the driver's door and shouted, "Dad, get in." But my dad didn't move. Instead he said, very quietly, "This time I won't leave you behind." My heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" The girl slowly stepped toward my dad. Splash, splash, and stopped at very close range. My dad dug through his pocket with shaking hands. An old silver lighter came out. The second I saw it, a strange memory flashed. When he was younger, sometimes when my dad drank, he'd just stare blankly at that lighter. I thought I finally understood why. My dad said in a low voice, "I'm the one who set your clothes on fire that day too." Felt like the air stopped. My mom's eyes went wide. None of it made sense to me. My dad let out a shaking breath. "It was an accident. We thought you were dead." Black water dripped from between the girl's hair. "But you moved." His voice cracked. "You were alive. And we were too scared to ever say a word. But I understood. Drunk adults, a prank, fire, and water. Even without knowing exactly what happened that day, it was horrible enough." The girl stood still for a while, and very slowly raised her hand. A bloated finger. The fingertip rose right up to my dad's face. I tried to jump out, but my body wouldn't move. Whether from fear or some other force, I don't know. Then the girl whispered, "It's still cold." In that instant the wind exploded. The whole reed field heaved like it was flipping over, and the shapes rising from the reservoir suddenly sped up. Splash, splash. Now it was the sound of running. My mom screamed, "Tejo, drive." I pulled myself together and turned the key. The engine wouldn't catch the first time. My hands were shaking too hard. Behind me the wet footsteps were getting closer. Splash, splash. Through the car window I could see black shapes. Bodies that looked human but were each broken somewhere. A limp arm. A leg bent backward. A wet face. And all of it was crowding toward our car. "Please, please." Almost crying, I turned the key. Vrrr. Clunk. The engine caught. In that moment my dad suddenly looked at me. It was a face I'll never forget for the rest of my life. A frightened, exhausted face. And strangely, a face that also looked a little at peace. "Take your mom and go. Come with us." I tried to open the door. But right then, the girl placed her hand on my dad's chest. A wet sound. And my dad's body went rigid in an instant, like a man frozen solid. My mom wailed, "Honey." In that moment, the shapes that had risen from the reservoir surrounded the car. A thud. The rear window shook. Wet palms slapped against the glass. Bloated faces pressed to the windows, looking in at us. Their mouths slowly opened. "Come with us. It's cold. Don't leave me alone." I stomped the gas, screaming. The tires spun, throwing up mud, and the car shot forward. A thud. I felt the sensation of running over something. My mom was crying, half unconscious. I watched the rearview mirror, and I saw that final scene. My dad standing in front of the reservoir, and behind him, dozens of wet shapes slowly closing in around him, like they were dragging him into the water. I couldn't bring myself to hit the brake all the way to the end. The car shook violently as it went down the slope. The sound of the tires scraping wet earth filled the car. My mom was sobbing in the passenger seat. "Honey, honey." I couldn't say anything. I kept watching the mirror. But at some point I couldn't see behind us anymore. It was the fog. I don't know when it formed, but a white haze was spreading fast all around the reservoir, so thick the headlights couldn't cut through it. And inside it, something was moving. Human shapes. Slowly walking shadows. I squeezed my eyes shut and opened them again. I wanted to believe it was a hallucination, but it wasn't. They were there. At the very edge of the headlight beams, wet people were standing. Heads bowed. Not moving. Just standing by the side of the road, watching the car. Splash. Somewhere, the constant sound of dripping water. My mom asked in a shaking voice, "Tejo." "Yeah." "Where's your dad?" I couldn't answer. Something was choking me in my throat. The truth is, I already knew. My dad wasn't coming back. In that moment, a strange smell began to spread through the car. A fishy smell. Wet earth. And the smell of an old reservoir. I frowned. The windows were all shut, but the smell kept getting stronger. My mom noticed too, looking around. "Don't you smell water?" Without a word, I looked up at the rearview mirror, and I thought my heart would stop. There was someone sitting in the back seat. The wet girl. Head bowed. water dripping from between her hair. I almost screamed. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop. My mom shouted in alarm. "What's wrong?" I twisted around, gasping. There was nobody there. An empty seat. But the seat was wet. Black water was slowly running down it. My mom saw it too. Her face went white. "You saw it, right?" Instead of answering, I started the car again. My hands shook so badly I put it in the wrong gear several times. That's when it happened. Static suddenly came out of the car speakers. The radio wasn't even on. Static. And very faintly, the sound of someone crying mixed in. "I'm cold." My mom covered her ears. Sobbing. I quickly hit the audio power button. But it wouldn't turn off. If anything, the sound got louder. "Why did you go?" "Daddy." Several voices overlapping. Nearly in a panic, I jabbed at the buttons. In that moment, something brushed past outside the window. A thump. It looked like a human face. I reflexively turned my head. And over the guardrail at the side of the road, I saw someone standing. A woman soaked in water. Her head bent at an impossible angle. The thing was moving at the same speed as the car. On foot. At a speed that made no sense. My mom saw it too and screamed. "Tejo!" I floored the gas. The engine roared like it would burst. But the strange thing was, the woman stayed beside us. She never fell behind. Through her wet hair her mouth opened. And she was smiling. The smile was so grotesque. Not like a person, but like dead facial muscles being forced to move. In that moment the lights inside the car flickered. Tick, tick. Just for a second. In the rearview mirror I saw it again. The back seat. This time it wasn't just the woman. The seat was full of wet people. Heads bowed, dripping water. I nearly lost my grip on the wheel. The car lurched hard. My mom wailed. "Dad." When I got it together and looked at the road again, there was a person standing right in front of me. It was my dad. I slammed the brakes. A thud. The seatbelt cut hard into my chest. The car barely stopped. In the center of the headlight beams, my dad was standing. Wet, head bowed. My mom was crying, trying to open the door. "Honey." In that instant I shouted, "Don't open it." I don't know why I said it, but instinctively I knew. That wasn't my dad. The shape in the headlights slowly raised its head. And the breath went out of me. There was no face. The skin was melting like it had dissolved in water. And where the eyes and mouth should have been, there were black hollows. My mom froze solid. The thing looked at us with its faceless face, then very slowly raised its arm, and pointed a finger behind the car. Cold sweat ran down me as I looked in the rearview mirror. In that moment, the wet shapes in the back seat all raised their heads at once. A splash. The sound of dripping water. Dozens of eyes like black holes were looking at me, and their mouths opened at the same time. "Get out!" I screamed and floored the gas all the way. The car charged at the shape. A thud. The feeling of running over something. But there was nothing in the mirror. Just empty road. My breath came up to my throat. My mom was nearly unconscious. I gritted my teeth and kept driving. I should have seen the city lights by then. We hadn't driven that long. But it was strange. The road wouldn't end. It felt like the same stretch repeating over and over. Wet forest. Guardrail. Fog. And the constant sound of water. Splash. Splash. Like someone outside the car was still following us. Then the navigation screen suddenly turned on. Static. Letters appeared over the black screen. My hands went stiff. And right below it, a drop of water fell. A tap onto the navigation screen. The moment I looked up at the ceiling, the breath nearly left me. On the car ceiling, wet hair was stuck. At first I thought it was a tree branch, mud, circling the tent very slowly. I lay there with my eyes open, holding my breath. Through the tent fabric, a faint lantern light was wavering. My mom was awake too, clutching the blanket, trembling. And my dad was just sitting there, hunched over, like a man who'd been waiting for that sound. The wet steps stopped right behind the tent. And in that moment, the fabric pressed in just barely. A little tap, like a single finger touching it. My mom drew a sharp breath. "Honey," my dad whispered, like he was covering her mouth. Be quiet. His tone was so low and firm that even I held my breath. Outside there was no sound at all. But the feeling that someone was still standing there wouldn't go away. You know how you can feel eyes on you even without seeing anyone? It was exactly that. With one layer of fabric between us, someone was watching us. I don't know how much time passed. Then the sound started moving again. Splash, splash, this time near the tent entrance. And very faintly, I heard someone breathing, a breath leaking out of a wet throat. My mom finally broke down and spoke. If you're a person, say something. The sound stopped. Silence. My heart dropped. Those few seconds felt horribly long. And then, the very next moment, the zipper handle on the tent started moving slowly. A little zip. Just a tiny bit. Someone outside was opening the zipper. I grabbed my mom before she could scream. My dad jumped up, snatched the flashlight, and suddenly threw the tent flap wide open. Who's there? The strong beam cut through the dark. But there was nobody outside. Just wet ground and swaying reeds. But then my dad's flashlight stopped on the ground. I followed where it pointed. In the mud all around the tent, there was a full ring of bare footprints. Not one or two, dozens. Like someone had circled us over and over. My mom clapped a hand over her mouth. What is that? The footprints were strange. There were almost no heel marks. They were pressed deep like someone walking only on their toes. And stranger still was the size. They were small like a child's feet. My throat suddenly went dry. It was so quiet I could hear myself swallow. Then from the reservoir came another splash. We all turned at once. Small ripples were spreading across the black water. And behind them, someone was standing at the water's edge. A faint shape, what looked like white clothing. My mom said in a shaking voice, "Isn't that a person?" But my dad said nothing. His face was rigid. And in that moment I understood. This wasn't the first time my dad had seen this. The thought sent a chill down my spine. He slowly lowered the flashlight and said quietly, "Don't look." But it was already too late. The shape at the water's edge had started moving. Slowly toward us. A splash. The sound of a foot lifting out of the water carried all the way to us. The shape was walking out of the reservoir. My mom burst into tears. "Honey, what is that?" My dad suddenly shouted, "Get in the tent!" And almost reflexively my mom and I scrambled inside. My dad hurried in after and zipped it shut, his breathing ragged. Outside, the wet footsteps came closer again. Slowly, like it was trying to scare us on purpose. I clapped my hand over my mouth. The steps stopped right in front of the tent. And then, a tap. The feeling of something leaning against the fabric. The fabric pushed inward a little. My mom grabbed my dad, half out of her mind. "Call the police! Call the police!" But the phone was dead. It hadn't had signal for a while. I tried to force myself to stay calm. Maybe it's a person, I told myself. Maybe it's just some lunatic playing a prank. I tried to believe that. But then a voice came from outside the tent. "Open the door." A woman's voice, wet and hoarse. My mom went rigid because the voice sounded exactly like hers. "Open the door." Goosebumps shot across my whole body. My mom was right next to me, and yet I was hearing my mom's voice from outside too. My dad gritted his teeth. "Don't answer." The voice came again, this time almost laughing. "Memories." Splash. Something started moving around the tent again. And in that moment a childhood memory came back to me. When I was in elementary school, there was a night in the dead of winter when my dad came home drunk. He was wet that night too. His clothes smelled like rotten water, and my mom got angry, asking why he'd gone to the reservoir again. And what my dad said then, I shouldn't have brought him along. I never understood what that meant. But now it was different. In a shaking voice I asked, "Dad, have you been here before?" He said nothing for a long while. Outside, the wet steps kept circling. Splash, splash, and mixed in, very faintly, the sound of someone sobbing, like a small child crying. Finally my dad spoke. 20 years ago. His voice was cracked. "Somebody died here." The air felt like it froze. My mom looked stunned, hearing it for the first time too. My dad's hands shook as he reached for a cigarette, but the lighter wouldn't catch. Click, click. Back then it was me and 3 friends out here. It was pouring rain. We were drinking and messing around, and one of the kids fell in the water. I held my breath. His eyes were wavering, and we didn't report it. My mom stared at him in disbelief. We were scared. We'd been drinking, and we were afraid we'd get blamed. The second he finished saying it, there was a sudden thud from outside. Something struck the tent hard 3 times. My mom screamed, and right after, a woman's voice whispered, very close, "Why didn't you pull her out?" My heart nearly stopped. That voice, this time it was clearly a young girl's. Cold,